Welcome back to our podcast exploring 1 and 2 Samuel as we're preaching through it on Sundays. If you've been with us for the journey so far, well done. I hope it's been a useful time to you. Joining me today are two of our preachers from Sunday. So we have Wayne Dilsley, our seniors minister. G'day, Wayne.
Hi, how you going, Keith? Hi out there.
Yeah, good. Great to have you with us. And, of course, the wonderful Paul Lucas from 5 and 7 o'clock sermon. G'day, Paul.
G'day, Keith. Wayne, good to see you guys.
Yeah, this should be fun. So some great questions that came in on Sunday and a few extra things we wanted to explore. So let me start off with this question for you, gentlemen. 2 Samuel 7, is it a big deal, not a big deal? Where does it sit in terms of the Bible storyline? What would we want to say about that?
Well, I see it as a big deal. I see it as the promises that were made to Abraham by God are now being restated to David, but in a bigger sense, and God's taking it forward. And it just reminds me that God doesn't forget. God is faithful to his promises. I mean, hundreds and hundreds of years go by, and you think it's all over, it's all finished, it's gone. And then suddenly he's saying to David, no, through you, it's all going to happen. And it's amazing encouragement to me that I can continue to rely on God. And just as in Matthew, Jesus is in the line of David, and it just reminds us that it's going somewhere. It's not just finishing at David; it's then going forward to Jesus.
Yeah, fantastic.
Yeah, it's good. Actually, as you pointed out on Sunday morning at 10, Keith, that Matthew 1:1, it's the son of David, the son of Abraham. So we get those three big points. I think sometimes it's the bit we can forget in 2 Samuel, and actually the whole Samuel story, because there are some other great stories there. And we can't forget the contribution it makes to the whole, because I think that actually helps us read the Bible better and interpret it better. I quoted Vaughan Roberts on Sunday night, who shows how the whole Bible talks about God's people in God's place under God's will and blessing, and that's obviously working on Goldsworthy's work as well. And so this contributes to that idea as we prepare for the last bit, which is the perfected kingdom, which we're all looking forward to. And so God is saying, I'm still here, I'm still operating, I'm opening up things for you. So it fits into the story that God is telling us as well, which gives it that sort of credence as to where we're heading. But I also love the idea that he gives this promise, and as Wayne said, he draws on Abraham, so you've got this echo. So the promise isn't just a thing isolated. It's saying, look back at what I've done and what I've said I will do. But because I've done that, look forward. Because I'm taking this somewhere as well. And so it gives us that confidence. Yeah,
that's good.
Yeah, I thought it was interesting. David thought he'd arrived. We got rest, we got the kingdom. I'll build a temple. We're settled down now. God, it's all done. And then God's saying, no, it's not. It's still a work in progress. And I'm the one that's provided all this up to now. And I'm going to keep providing in the future, and keep trusting me.
Yeah. And it struck me again as I was sort of preparing and thinking about it. 2 Samuel 7, every time you read the word Christ in the New Testament, it's 2 Samuel 7. That's what it's about. It really is the origin of the expectation of a Messiah. And so it shapes all politics and history all the way down to the New Testament. The Jews, the Jewish leaders, the remnant, they're all looking for the one who is to come that's based on this promise in 2 Samuel 7. And so every time you read the word Christ, you should think 2 Samuel 7 is the context for that. It's a fulfillment of a great promise of God. And so for that sense, it's profound. It's really is profound. The other thing that struck me is that in Ephesians 1, you read this verse, God chose us in Christ, in him, before the creation of the world. He predestined us for adoption to sonship through Jesus Christ. That is, the idea of the Christ was in the mind of God before the foundation of the world. So in a sense, this isn't God reacting to the situation as you might think. It's God sort of revealing his hand. We were always going to have a king. We were always going to have a Christ. The picture in Revelation was always in God's mind. And here, in a sense, he's laying out a significant part of the unfolding promise. What a great name for the series, right? Yeah.
That's good. It's a great observation.
Yeah,
mate.
it's good.
Thank you.
That's great.
Well, thanks. That's a good start, gents. So let's think some of the content that's in 2 Samuel 7. We had some good questions on Sunday and a chance for us to have a bit of a chat about that, particularly about verse... hang on, I'm looking at Ephesians, so I'm not going to find it now. Verse 14, I think it is.
I don't think there's any chapter 7 in Ephesians.
No,
either, mate.
I was struggling. Struggling there.
A new one.
Verse 14 that talks about, I will be his father and he will be my son. When he does wrong, I will punish him with a rod wielded by men, with floggings inflicted by human hands. So the question I think that arises is, hey, if this whole passage is about Jesus, what do we do with this verse that talks about when he does wrong and he'll be flogged? Someone asked, is this talking about the floggings that Jesus received as he was before he went to the cross? Is it talking about that? What are we going to say about those things?
I think, happy if I go first, Wayne?
Sure
Yeah.
thing.
Perhaps just a couple of things. One is maybe one of the mistakes we make is that we jump from here to Jesus, right? So it's not just a prediction about Jesus. It's God saying how he's going to unfold his promise through time, and through the kings, and through his son. And as we look back to, Woodhouse makes a really great observation in 2 Samuel 5 verse 1 about Israel who come to David and say, we are the son of God. So there's that sense in which that will continue through. And I think God is unfolding that. So one mistake we can make is we just see it as a prediction about Jesus. And I don't think it's just that. So there's that idea of the son and not just being a prediction. The other thing I would say is that it shows, this promise shows that God will discipline those who come after David in his line, because they will fail. And it's also discipline that comes it's not supernatural, it's at the hands of other people. So that's why we get words like floggings and things. God does use other nations and other people to exercise his judgment on his people. But even though we see all that in verse 4, you can't miss the but of verse 15, because he says, my love will never leave him. And so even though this is happening, it's God shaping his people and preparing them for what will eventually come.
Yeah.
There's an answer.
That's good.
Yeah, he's that loving father that just can't stand by and see his children doing things wrong without correcting them, without stopping them, without bringing their attention somehow. And we see that as we go in the Bible, he uses other nations to do that because they don't listen. He sends prophets, they don't listen. He sends nations in to invade them and fight against them and get their attention.
Yeah.
So he's, I think that's a dual thing of happening right then and there with other nations, but also looking forward to Jesus. You can't just sort of cut God's plan off as here or there. It's a continuous plan, but it's got mostly right now is what's happening with the other nations and the nation of Israel itself, and the leaders that follow.
Yeah, that's really good. And I think that's really helpful, Paul, that observation about the sonship, because you get that language of the Son of God landing on the kings, don't you, in Psalm 2? And so it's a sense in which the king becomes a representative of the people, and the people were meant to be collectively the Son of God. The king's meant to express the best of the people, the sort of representative nature of that. And so Son of God, it's easy for us just to jump to thinking second person of the Trinity, but Son of God is a messianic kind of title. That is, the king was meant to be the Son of God. And so I remember, I think it was Philip Jensen once said this line to me that sort of rattled me, but has stayed with me since, that in the New Testament, what you see is that God the Son becomes the Son of God. That is, he who was the Son of the Father eternally steps into history and as a human being becomes the Son of God. That is the Messiah. and becomes the ultimate fulfillment of this kind of promise of, I will be your father, you will be my son. The only one who could eventually fulfill this promise was someone who was human from the line of David, but in a sense more than that. And so that gives that extra context to the baptism of Jesus when, when he comes up out of the water and he says, you're my son whom I love. I think there's two levels there. You're the eternal son, but you are now the king. You've sort of been anointed. You've taken on that mantle in this process of being baptized and identifying with the people of God in that baptism. You are now stepping into the role that I've prepared for you to walk in.
Okay, that's interesting. Do you think, though, God calling Israel my son?
Yep.
How does that play into what you're saying? Because I'm just thinking, isn't it? It's more like we can't rule out the incarnation part of this. He's human, so that's when he calls him his son. Transfiguration, he does the same thing. I'm not sure I'm quite.
Yeah.
there.
So when you have the king becomes the Psalm 2 language, the Son of God. The king becomes the representative of all that the people were meant to be. So he what sort of goose doesn't turn the volume down? He takes on that mantle as the representative of the people. And Woodhouse points this out in his commentary as well about that there is one who will stand before God as the representative of the whole, as the son. Now, it doesn't mean that Israel loses that title, but the king, in a sense, is the individual expression of all that the whole people were meant to be. And that is what you see, that each king, the Psalm 2 is a coronation psalm, so every king gets called the son, hoping that they will be this one until you get to Jesus.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll have to think more about that.
Yeah,
But thanks.
good.
That's
That's
good.
all right.
I was just also wondering whether it's also having this promise should help God's people with their assurance. And what I mean by that is, like, as we see 1 and 2 Kings unfold, like the king is gone, right, from Jerusalem, from his seat, and then he ends up in the dining room of Cyrus, is it? I don't know. Whoever the king was, Jehoiachin, I think.
Yep.
And you've got to be thinking, how? The king's in jail, and then whoever the king is, whether it's Cyrus or Darius, I can't remember, has him in his dining hall, and you think, it's all gone. Nothing's going to happen. But God is still saying, this is my king, even when it seems dire. And maybe that's also an anticipation of Jesus too, because it came down to Jesus.
Yeah.
I am the true Israel.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah.
And the prophets pick up this promise and cast it forward as the great one who is to come. So you get Isaiah talking about the root, Isaiah
11.
the stump of Jesse.
Yeah.
That's 2 Samuel 7. And he's saying that one's still to come. There is one who will come, who will gather the nations. This sort of grandiose end time language about this one who is to come. Or, of course, pointing forward to Jesus. Now, often when we think Christ and we think that sort of thing, we point to the prophets, but the prophets got it from Samuel first, and that's why they cast that vision forward. So God's still going to do this. He's going to do it on a grand scale. Yeah.
Okay.
Really good. All right. So someone else asked this question. I'll be interested in your thoughts on this, gentlemen. God says to David here, this is my horrible Australian paraphrase, right? The authorised
She'll be
Keith
right,
version, unauthorised Keith version. It doesn't matter what you or your sons will do, I'll love you guys anyway, right? You're always mine, doesn't matter what you do. Now, why didn't he say that to Saul? He's like, why didn't he say, Saul, doesn't matter what you do, I'll be yours anyway? See, does Saul get the rough end of the deal, and David gets, a sweet, free hall pass to do whatever he wants? What's going on? I tried to fit in as much terrible Australian vernacular as I could into that question. I hope you noticed.
So we're going to talk about language now? We're talking about the story.
Did God come the raw prawn with Saul?
Sounds like it, doesn't it? It really does look like he did with Saul. I mean, Saul got a raw deal, and David got a sweet deal. And even after, we're going to see next week that he does some really bad stuff, but he's still kept in the kingship. Yeah, it does seem different. I have to keep going back when I look at that, thinking, well, it's not me that controls it and owns it and plans it. Everything's God's. He's the one who decides. I don't deserve anything. I don't deserve to be a Christian. I don't even deserve to know him. I deserve to walk around in my own world and oblivious to God and what he's done for me in Jesus. Except God's tapped me on the shoulder and said, hey, hang on a minute, look at this. I opened my eyes to see Jesus, who he is and what he's done, and moved in me to respond to Jesus with that faith to believe, and continues to work every day in me because, I'm not perfect. I still do things wrong, and thankfully God keeps reminding me, hey, that's wrong. I feel guilty. I love having I don't want to have a hard heart. I want to have a soft heart to God, a heart that can be convicted and repent and turn back to God. Doesn't mean you're a soft person, but a soft heart. And then when you come to Saul, he was a guy that seemed to, he hardened his heart to God. And he was chosen to fall. The people thought he was head and shoulders above everyone else. Hey, here's our king. What a great king he's going to be. He could have easily been an alternative to God because he's so big, so strong. If he'd been successful, it could have been, let's worship Saul rather than worship God. David comes along, the little shepherd boy, the runt. Nothing special about him in that way, but God works through him, and hopefully people were seeing it's God at work. It's not David, and David was trying to give God the credit in his response. Particularly, I like David's response in this prayer after God makes these promises. So there's a real humility there. I like the response in the prayer because he says he goes in verse 18. He went and sat before the Lord.
Yeah,
it's like he's overcome.
Yeah.
Wow, God, what you've just promised me, what you're doing in me, I'm not worthy of this. God's already said he took him out of pasture from being a shepherd.
Yeah.
So he recognised it's all God. And I think that's how it's, to me, that's the impact of the differences.
Yeah.
And it's God's choice. Sadly. It's not sad, but it's not my right to choose. Even though I might like Saul. I might like Saul. I might feel sorry for him, but it's still not my right.
Yeah.
And it's a sad fact too, isn't it? There are people all around us who most are not going to come to know Jesus. And I'd love them to, and I want them to, and I'm trying to. In the end, I've got to recognise it's God's choice.
Yeah.
And God's work. Yeah.
Yeah, God's work is going to do it. That's right.
Yeah, it's really good. Yeah. I was wondering whether also, to add to that, whether it plays into the idea of a king like the nations. So we can, and Woodhouse pointed this out when he came and visited us, that Saul was under law, David was under grace. I thought that was very profound. But that makes him a king like the nations. Right? All the other kings of all the other nations were under the laws of their land. And, we talk about the laws of the Medes and Persians, sorry. Like even in the story of Esther, he couldn't change the law. He had to rewrite one. So Saul was like a king like the nations. He had to follow the law. And so God said, well, if that's what you want, I'll give you this king. If you do well, good. If you don't, Whereas with David, it's, well, this is my choice. And as Wayne said, but it's more than that. This is the kind of king I'm going to give you because I know that it's not always going to go well, but my love, my hesed, will never leave him. And I think that may be another distinction.
Yeah. Really helpful. Very good. All right, probably got time for one more, gents. This has been fun and stimulating. We notice that part of the promise that's given to David is a place. He says, I will, verse 10, 2 Samuel 7, I'll provide a place for my people Israel and will plant them so they can have a home of their own and no longer be disturbed. So what do we do with that? Does that mean, is there a place on the planet Earth now that's more holy than another place that we should be looking towards? or is our church building that place, or what do we do with that? How might that be fulfilled in Jesus?
That's a very good question, Keith.
Thanks, Paul.
I'm sure Wayne is chomping at the bit.
Lovely to answer that one. Yeah, look, straight away, I think it can't be the place where they're at because they're already there, and to some degree they've got the nation and settled, and they've got been defeating enemies. So the place he's talking about can't be where geographically where Israel is. And is it another part of the world? I can't see why it would be. I think it's got to be looking beyond the world. It could be looking in the future to another place. And I would, knowing now, I think it's a new heaven and a new earth, that place, that revelation idea where the two come together, where we're living under God's rule in that perfect place where there's no more wickedness, there's no more sin, there's no more trials and testing. That's what I'd be thinking it'd be.
Yeah, it's good, isn't it? I guess in the Old Testament there is a sense of physicalness because God says, I will give you this land as an inheritance. So it's God's to give, which I think is an important thing. It's God's to give. Because I'm wondering whether the place isn't where God is. So he's in a tent. We learn about that. And he follows the Israelites around in the wilderness. Well, he doesn't follow them. He takes them. He leads them, doesn't he, in the wilderness. But he's with them. So the place... their place is where God is, and he's with them all the time. And I wonder whether that's not even part of Revelation 21 and something that Isaiah 65 is picking up, that, it said, I didn't see a temple and there was no sun. That was I saw God there, or Christ. So the place is where God is. If we are God's people in God's place, it's where God is, because it's under his rule and blessing. I think those three things fit together. And Hebrews obviously picks this up because he's obviously writing to a Jewish audience who were thinking, it's our bricks and mortar kind of thing, and says to them in verse 22, but you have come to Mount Zion, which is where Jerusalem is in that area, to the city of the living God. So it's the city of the living God because he's there, right? The heavenly Jerusalem. You have come to thousands upon thousands of angels in joyful assembly, to the church of the firstborn, whose names are written in heaven. You have come to God, the judge of all, to the spirits of the righteous made perfect, to Jesus, the mediator of the new covenant, and to the sprinkled blood that speaks a better word than the blood of Abel. In all those things, it's a place you're coming to, but who's there? It's the presence of God that gives it, that makes it the place.
Yeah,
I think.
Yeah, that's right. I think that's really good. And Jesus sort of highlights that, doesn't he, when he says, my kingdom is not of this world. Otherwise, my servants would fight to stop this. And John 14, I'm going there to prepare a place for you. And so I think all of that, the place now, God dwells with us everywhere because of the Spirit. So there's no patch of dirt that's more holy than other, because God's Spirit can be with Christians wherever they meet, under a tree or in a building or underground or wherever. And eventually, I love when someone pointed this out to me that, in the temple, the place where God was going to be most known as the Holy of Holies, part of the temple, which is, you look at the dimensions and it's a cube, right? And then when you get the city, the heavenly Jerusalem described in Revelation, the dimensions, it's a cube. The whole thing is the Holy of Holies because God is there directly with his people. And so I think that the ultimate trajectory of this promise to David, you see, fulfilled now by the Spirit dwelling with his people, but ultimately fulfilled in the future. I will be with them, and they will be my people, and I will walk amongst them in that most sort of holy place. There's no mediation needed because all the work's done.
And maybe that's what the prayer in Numbers 6 is anticipating too. I turn my face towards you. There's that presence idea.
Yeah,
that was really helpful. Because as you were talking, I was thinking, actually, but that also means that the physical is not ruled out, because we will remain physical as Jesus has been raised. So there is a measure of that, I guess, or a level of that.
Yeah. No, that's really good. All right, gentlemen, thanks for your time. Thanks, Wayne, for joining us.
Thanks for being here. Thanks for hearing us today.
Yeah, it's good. And thanks, Paul.
Thanks,
Great to have you with us. And thanks, Alex, on the knobs and buttons over there. making us sound more intelligent than we actually really are. Thanks for that. And thanks for your company. It's been great to have you with us. I hope this has been informative, maybe even slightly entertaining. Have a great time walking with Jesus in his word. We'll catch you next time.
Amen.